So today we have Emily here with us, Emily Sumner, and Emily is from Sumner Immigration. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I've been trying to get you to sit down with me for a while, and I always enjoyed chatting to you. We've spoken a couple of times, and you're based out in Virginia, right?
That's correct.
Okay, we've traveled through there a couple of times. We've been up Virginia, Washington D.C.
Yeah.
Spent some time in Colonial Williamsburg.
Oh, yes. Yes. We're
Real
about
pretty.
45 minutes east of Williamsburg.
Okay, yeah, really, really beautiful. I remember we stayed the night. We stayed the night in Richmond.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
very beautiful. So the reason I've asked you on here is because you're a professional that specializes in some very interesting work visas, right?
Yes.
Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, everyone has a why. We all have a why as to why we do things. Do you have one?
Yes. I love working with people from different countries, different cultures, different nationalities. I also I no longer am the person who fills in forms, but I love systems and processes. And so I was very attracted to the administrative law side of things. And I was actually a student paralegal in undergrad at an immigration law firm. I was actually a Spanish major and wanted to practice speaking Spanish with native speakers. So I advocated for myself and got a internship, a summer unpaid, started as an unpaid summer internship, and then that turned into a student paralegal position the rest of the years, and I loved it. And went to law school knowing I wanted to practice immigration law, which is kind of unusual. But I love it, and I would not practice any other area of law.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I've never heard you speak Spanish though. I mean, I've heard guys like Charles Cook just switch over like this
Yeah.
into Spanish, and I'm like, wait, it sounds like a native. And
Yeah. So, yeah, my Spanish is rusty. It's there. It's somewhere in my brain. It's there for sure.
okay,
But I speak now what I call immigration Spanish because that's primarily the context in which I speak it. And if I were, on the street in Mexico, I would struggle a little bit with vocabulary. That's
wow,
okay. Most of my clients now speak English,
okay,
and not as many of them speak Spanish, but I'm always happy to help if I can in Spanish.
right. Now I'm ex-South African, and I know that interestingly enough, when you and I spoke, you actually have someone from South Africa working for you, right?
We do. Solange is our virtual assistant. She lives in Johannesburg, South Africa. She's actually originally from Mozambique, and she is the best. We love her so much. The most beautiful person inside and out. Such a great attitude, so great with clients, has the most beautiful accent you've ever heard. It's awesome. We love Solange.
Yeah, it's South Africa is an amazing country, and I think there's so much focus on it at the moment. It's so very topical,
Yes.
and maybe for some good reasons, maybe for some others. But I run an immigration group, Emily. We've spoken about that. There's about 17.8, almost going towards 18,000 members, and there's a lot of questions always around immigration, and how do I get to the States if I wanted to? And people don't always realize it's one of the more difficult countries in the world to immigrate to. And one of the things that I always say is, you start with family. Like, do you have any family there? And like, what do you do for a living? Do you have any special skills that could be of value? And that's specifically what you do is you work a lot with the employee-based visas. Do you want to just help the listeners just talk us through what that process looks like? Because everyone always thinks that you can. So normally in people's minds, what they do is they go online, they have a look at some jobs on LinkedIn, or they have some on Indeed, and they're like, well, I'm going to start applying for those jobs. And then they think once I get it, that's when they start asking these questions on the immigration forums, like, where can I apply for a work visa? And it's like, doesn't quite work like that.
Right.
What, walk us through what is that? There's a bit of a process in the beginning there. What does that look like for an employer if you want to employ a foreign worker?
Sure. So if you're an employer and you want to employ a foreign national employee, the number one thing that we do is immigration law, maybe not number one thing, but one of the most important things we do when we're first engaging with an employer who wants to hire someone is to determine if there's an appropriate visa classification that they can use for this particular hire. And if so, what is the timeline going to look like? And what are the probabilities of having that particular case approved? So, for example, I regularly receive inquiries from employers who, for example, home healthcare workers, they want to employ home healthcare workers. And I get it. There's a shortage. I absolutely get it. My grandmother just recently passed, but needed those services. I know firsthand that that's a very needed and valuable, honestly, position. However, the challenge with US immigration law in general, you can never make a blanket statement, but in general, is that the positions, the immigration options that are available are geared for the most part towards professional positions, meaning a
Right.
position that requires a minimum of a bachelor's degree in a specific field of study. So, going back to your question, if an employer says, hey, I want to hire X person, I want to know what are the job duties, what are the requirements for that position, do you have someone in mind for the position? Or are you just kind of, I'm not a recruiter, but are you casting your net and looking for someone? But that's a kind of frustrating aspect sometimes of US immigration law is it really is geared towards professionals for the most part.
Right. Right. And I mean, that's understandable. I mean, the US wants to be the number one country in the world. We want to continue to grow, but there are also these positions that we all need. Like no one wants to do them, right? I mean, there's
And they're
this.
valuable. They are, and I'm not even talking about, there's some positions that are unskilled, some that are skilled. Every part of it is valuable. We as a society cannot function without everyone doing the jobs that are needed. And it's not, a status thing. It's not, everything is valuable.
Right.
Um, and we need individuals to do, like you said, jobs that are less attractive to US workers.
True. I want to just come back. I've digressed a little bit in terms of there's a perm process that most people don't understand. What does that look like? Do you want to just touch on that? Because I know that is one of the questions that regularly comes up by me.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about what that is first. There is an employment based green card. There are multiple types of employment based green card processes. One is the perm labor certification. So, the idea behind the perm labor certification process is that a US employer has to show that there are no US workers who are willing, available, or qualified for the particular position. So, most of the time, if a person wants to be sponsored, foreign national wants to be sponsored for permanent residence in the United States through an employer, most of the time, this is the option that they would go through. There are some other options. There's the EB-1A, the classification for foreign nationals of extraordinary ability. There's the EB-1C. There are other options, is my point. But the vast majority of individuals who are sponsored by employers for an employment-based green card go through this perm process. This perm process has evolved over the years, especially in terms, there haven't been major changes in terms of the actual process, but the processing times have changed, fluctuated tremendously over the years. And what we're seeing right now is that it is taking longer to get through this whole perm process now than it has ever before. And when I say ever before, the perm process, this particular process was started in the year 2005, which happens to be the year I started practicing immigration law. So I didn't do the previous, the predecessor process. But I've been in it for as long as it's existed, and it's taking longer than it ever has before. I think there are a couple of reasons for this. One is part of the perm labor certification process. There's a lot that goes into the preparation stage of the perm process. And one key part of that is to obtain what's called a prevailing wage determination. So it's a form that we submit to Department of Labor that has information about the proffered, what we call the proffered position. So the position that's being offered, the job title, job duties, requirements, location. We submit that to the Department of Labor electronically. When I say we, I mean we immigration lawyers, if we're working with clients. And right now, recently, it's taken 6 to 7 months to get that back. That's been kind of the average for a while now. That particular part isn't, it's been faster than that. Sometimes it's been a little bit longer than that, but it's taking a while. And that takes up a big chunk of that that preparation timeline. We got a prevailing wage determination back earlier this week, and another attorney that I work with, Ashley, in the office, was so excited. She said, Emily, it only took 5 months. Yay. So we're, from seven, but every month matters, as you know, if you're in the process or involved, every month matters. But I think the bigger challenge is the processing time right now, is the processing time once we submit the labor certification application. It is taking, I kid you not, 16 to 17 months from the time we submit it to Department of Labor to the time that we have a decision on the case. That is absurd. Okay, when we first started this perm process, and of course, it was a different time for lots of reasons. But when we first started this process, we would get the certifications back in a number of days, literally days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months over the years, but 17 months is by far the longest amount of time that it's ever taken.
Hmm. That's a long time. And I think, you know what, I realize a lot of people don't understand is that you'd think we're a first world country, so there would be really, really easy electronic processes for filing. But there just isn't. I mean, they're there, but if you make use of them, what you're going to find is that you get a request for further evidence. And so what a lot of people do is they just resort to filing manual paperwork, and so it stacks, right?
Yeah. So within the perm labor certification process, you can file by paper. I actually never have. You Most of the time people file online. And yes, now they're called requests for information by Department of Labor. And yes, absolutely, those can delay the process. However, I have good news on that front, believe it or not.
Yeah.
We have had two requests for information. I might have said evidence a minute ago. It's requests for information with Department of Labor. We've had two of those recently, and you're given a month to submit the documentation. For the first case, we had an approval 2 weeks later. For the second case, we submitted the RFI, the response, on Friday. Monday, we had a certification. It was amazing. So the good news is on that front, it's knock on wood, it's not taking months and months like it was before. So we're thankful for whatever we can get, right?
Right. So tell me about some of the things. Like, let's just say you sitting, whether you are sitting in the United Kingdom, whether you're in South Africa or in India, and you think you've been to the US, or maybe you never have, but you've seen it on the TV, and you think this is this is the place where I want to be. Because I must tell you, I wake up often thinking I'm so grateful to be here. I really am. And it's still, the American dream is still very much alive, yeah. And if you're willing and you want to grab it, this is the place to be. But how do you get here? I mean, there really is this place where before anyone starts doing any research, like if you could if you could take us to that place or that moment in time where just about every immigrant to the United States start with, like, what are the most important things that you think anyone should know before they even consider immigration? Do you have like a thing that you can walk us through there?
Absolutely. So I've kind of, in preparation for this, put together a list of 5 things to consider. And I'm not going to say top 5 because every case is different, every person's situation is different, but key considerations to think about. And the very first one is that multiple roads, maybe not all roads, but multiple roads or paths lead to Rome. We know that saying, all roads lead to Rome. And my point is, there are multiple ways. So if you have the goal of emigrating to the United States, there are multiple pathways that are available or could be available to any given person. Not every pathway is going to work or be an option for every person, but there are multiple pathways. So, for example, Within, I like to think of the pathways as kind of buckets. When you're thinking about, let's say that you're sitting in India or France or South Africa, wherever you are, and you're thinking, I really want to immigrate to the United States. The kind of pathways that I think about are employment based immigration, and within employment based immigration, you have temporary visa classifications and permanent, like we were just talking about the green card process. You have family based. That requires, as the name implies, a qualified relative to be able to sponsor you for permanent residence. You have things like asylum or refugee. Asylum is when you claim asylum at the port of entry or when you're already in the United States. Refugee is typically when you're settled in the United States or another country by a refugee organization. There is the diversity visa lottery, which I think you know something about. um, I would say those are the main pathways. So I always encourage clients, and when I'm giving seminars or speaking to groups, I always encourage people to, yes, have the goal, your end in mind, but be open to different ways to getting there, and be open to starting down one path, finding an obstacle, and then either overcoming that obstacle or considering approaching the problem, the challenge, or goal from a different angle. And it's possible that you'll get there.
I agree with you. I mean, like with anything else, like if you want to start a business, I always say, what is in your hand? For me, I refer back to the biblical sense. When Moses was standing at that river, he heard, "What is in your hand?" And he looked, and it was his staff. And
Yeah.
that's the thing is, if you think this is where I'd like to be, the questions are, it starts becoming a discovery, right? It's you want to know, like, what have you studied? What do you know? Do you have a business? How about family? Do you have family here? And so you start going through those questions. So that's interesting. So there's multiple paths that you can follow, and that's important. Is how do people find out what these paths are? Is there a place where they can find out?
That is a great question, and one that I don't necessarily have the answer to. I would say, I mean, I do have the answer in the sense that you can talk to an immigration attorney, right? So if you have a consultation with an immigration attorney, we meaning any, just at least the way that I do it, your typical immigration attorney will ask you all kinds of questions similar to the questions that you just asked. What's your skill set? Where are you right now? What's in your hand? You have family members that are here. Are you able to invest in a business? And what's your country of nationality? I always ask, where were you born? That's important for green card purposes most of the
Which
time. And I ask, are you a citizen of any other country in addition to whatever country you're a citizen of now? Because there are certain visa classifications that are specific to certain nationalities. So I would say to start, I would start by looking online, but taking it with a grain of salt. I hate to say just like go Google it and you'll get your answer. Absolutely not. You have to pay attention to the sources, but even looking at, I think even for a layperson, right? Somebody who's not an immigration attorney, doesn't do this day in and day out, just looking at the USCIS website. So USCIS is the name of the immigration agency here in the United States. Looking at that website or the Department of State website, it can be confusing and overwhelming. And I have consultations every day with individuals who have looked at that information, looked all over Google, and they're so confused about where to start. Understandably, it's not their fault. It's because it's an incredibly complex system. And it takes somebody who knows the system to help you navigate it and know what your options are.
right? And just on that, Emily, I realize when you're out there and you start looking, because that's what I did. Now I already had a legal background. I already had built several businesses. And when I started going online, I just found it really, really intimidating because there is so much information. And like you say, you speak to your auntie's cousin, and they'll everyone always knows someone that's gotten to the US on a way that you think like, how did they do it?
Right.
And the reality is that every single situation calls for uh, that kind of deep questioning. And that's what an immigration attorney does. And I want to just encourage everyone. I'm not just encouraging you to reach out to Emily because she's here. So it's not a is not a paid podcast. This is just one out of interest because I'm curious. But I can tell you just from interacting with you, Emily, and from seeing your energy and knowing what you do and how much you care about people, I want to encourage you if you are looking at immigration, really do consult her. It's money well spent. Speaking to an immigration attorney, they'll tease those things out that you may not even know because, like Emily said, she asks like, where were you born? But sometimes it's not just about you. Sometimes it's where was your spouse born? Because it's there's all kinds of angles, and I always find it's almost like you if you set your heart to it and you set your sights, it's possible. It's just the journey may differ. We even thought of immigrating to the UK first, which we added another 5 years, and that was because South Africa wasn't a treaty country. So, for us to first go to the UK, which would have added 5 years onto my immigration journey, and then from there going a different route with the E2, I was prepared to do that. And then in between all of this, somewhere the diversity visa thing happened, like you alluded to. So
Yeah.
yes. So what else? What else are things that people should look out for?
Sure. So I think a lot of times when a person thinks about beginning the process, they think about getting a green card, right? That's something that people hear about a lot. It's online a lot. And that might be the path that you take, but be open to the possibility that you would begin by coming to the United States on a temporary visa. And I don't mean entering on a visitor's visa. That might be your situation and then changing to something else. But I mean, for almost every letter of the alphabet, there is a different visa classification and then subclassifications within those. That every visa classification has a different purpose, requirements, duration, things like that. But it's not at all uncommon for a person to enter the United States on one of these temporary visa classifications, like, for example, the E2, and that is one that's country specific. Unfortunately, we don't have a treaty with South Africa, but there are others that are not country specific and that you could enter, for example, the L1 or the H1B or the J. So they're all different O1. They're all different types of visa classifications. And that sometimes is easier. I don't like to use the word easy within the immigration context, but sometimes that's a more appropriate path to take first instead of just going straight for the green card. And then once you're here, then you find a way to obtain the green card if that's your goal.
Yeah, the L1, interestingly enough, it's a dual purpose visa. It's almost the only work visa with a path to a green card. Am I right?
Yes, that and the H-1B. So, yes, you're referring to the concept of dual intent, which means that it's literally in black and white in the rules, the immigration rules, that you can hold one of those visa classifications, H-1B or L1, and pursue permanent residence at the same time. So that means you can travel, you can outside of the US and re-enter as long as you have a valid visa. You can extend your status, that type of thing. Most of the other visa classifications are not necessarily dual intent, but one common misconception is if I hold one of these other visa classifications, like for example, if I hold E2 or TN or F1, whatever it is, which is a student visa, any number of those, that I can't pursue permanent residence at the same time. And that's not true. You can, you just have to be very strategic about it and make sure that you have a plan to maintain your status and know when you can and cannot travel, the effects of travel, know if you'll be able to extend your status, things like that.
I
But
gotcha.
yes, the L and the H are great in terms of being dual intent.
Okay. In terms of this, like you said, there's almost a visa for every letter of the alphabet. And there's the L1 visa, and then there's the O visas and the F visas. Just briefly about the ones that you most commonly deal with, because I know that you specialize in the H1B. Am I right?
We do a lot of H-1Bs for sure. So the H-1B is for professional positions that means positions that require a minimum of a bachelor's degree in a specific field of study. For the H-1B, an employer has to sponsor you. That's true for a lot of these visas, but not all of them. So the H-1B requires an employer to sponsor. You can actually, there's a provision that allows you to self-sponsor for the H-1B. In other words, if you own the company, if you meet certain requirements, you can sponsor yourself. One of the challenges with the H-1B is the numerical limitation. There is an annual numerical limit on the number of new H-1Bs, and that's 65,000 plus an additional 20,000 for US master's degree holders. So every year there's a registration period where employers register individuals, foreign nationals, maybe they're employees already, maybe not, who want a new H-1B. And then usually there's a lottery at the end of March to select basically 85,000 total H-1Bs. So that can be a challenge with the H-1B. There are a couple of exceptions to that, but that can be a challenge. But there are any number of other visa classifications as well. So others that we use or that we see commonly in our practice are, of course, the L. The L is designed to facilitate the international transfer of key employees who are working for multinational employers. By that, I mean there has to be an entity overseas and a related entity here in the United States, corporate entities. The L1B is for individuals, workers with special knowledge, hopefully defined in the regulations as knowledge that is special. Yay. L1A is for managers or executives, or managers and executives. So that's an option. You do have to work for the overseas entity for at least 1 year before you are transferred, before you're able to transfer to the United States. Other classifications that we see frequently are, of course, the F1, the student visa. We work with a lot of international students who are here on F1. They will often transition from F1 to the H1B or a different visa classification. And there's something, an intermediary, you're still maintaining F1 status, but there's something called OPT, optional practical training, which allows you to work in the United States for up to a year or an additional 2 years if you qualify for a STEM, if you have a STEM related degree. So F1 is one that we use frequently. The TN, there's some that are country specific, so we're kind of getting into those now. TN is for citizens of Canada or Mexico. Okay. H1B1 is for citizens of Chile or Singapore. E3 is for citizens of Australia. There's the E2, which is the investor visa, and I think you talked in more detail about that on a previous podcast. But the E2 is for investors, and that is treaty-based. So the US has treaties with certain countries, but not all countries. For these countries, these visa classifications that are country specific, it's important to know that it's not about where you were born. It's about where you're a citizen. And believe it or not, you believe it because you had a similar experience, I think. But I've had so many clients over the years who have obtained citizenship in another country. So for example, in the UK or Canada, for example, in other countries as well, to be able to take advantage of one of these visa classifications and eventually come to the United States. So that's a longer way to do it, but they've gotten where they want to be ultimately.
Okay. You also do, just slightly off topic, you also do a lot of family-based visas, right?
Yep, we do.
The adjustment of status, is it like spouses? What does it mean when you say family-based visas?
Sure. So family-based visas, just in general, that refers to the process of a U.S. citizen or permanent resident of the United States sponsoring a family member to come to the United States to live for permanent residence, basically. So yes, we handle a wide variety of family-based immigration, and that segues nicely to my third point, which is that family-based immigration is a common way for a person to immigrate to the United States. But there are two kind of big buckets within family-based. There's immediate relatives and the preference category. So immediate relatives are spouses of U.S. citizens, minor children of U.S. citizens, and parents of U.S. citizens who are adults, so 21 or older. So I know you think, oh, my brother is an immediate relative. We grew up together, nuclear family. I would like to think that, and yes, in my heart I do, but for purposes of U.S. immigration, they're not an immediate relative. So everybody else who qualifies, there's certain family relationships that qualify, some that don't. They fall into the preference category, and that's my third kind of thing to consider is if you're going through the family-based process, make sure you have a clear understanding of how long that process is going to take. Because, for example, if your sibling is a U.S. citizen, and you want to have your siblings sponsor you for permanent residence, that's great. The wait for the green card is going to be a very long time. Depending on your country of birth, it could be 10, 15, 20 plus years. And
brutal.
realistically longer than that. So just have
Yeah,
a realistic idea of how long that particular option is going to take.
I know. One of the moderators in our group, she's just had her brother finally arrive after 17.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be worth the wait. I'm not saying don't do it at all. I'm just saying have a clear understanding. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have immediate relatives. So you mentioned, I think, marriage based filing for adjustment of status here. We do that regularly. We help clients with that regularly. So maybe we have somebody, a client who is here on an H-1B or another temporary visa classification, and they fall in love with a US citizen and their spouse files for permanent residence. Or there are situations where a person enters the United States on a visitor's visa, they fall in love while they're here with a US citizen and they file. So it doesn't, my point is it doesn't have to be a work visa.
I understand. Okay. All right. I'm going to let you move along because I'm interested to hear some of the other things.
Yeah, so my fourth point is that we talked a minute, for just a minute about family based. With employment based, it absolutely is possible to obtain permanent residence in the United States through the employment based process, but it's going to take a while to get there. So there are different there are different paths within employment based. Some are faster than others, but regardless, there is a specific limit on the number of employment based green cards available every year, 140,000. That includes spouses and children. So there's something called the Visa Bulletin. It's a little more than we probably want to get into right now, but know that there's a limit, a numerical limit every year. And there's so many people who want a green card that there's a virtual line of people waiting for the green card. So if you're thinking about coming to the US through an employment-based process, you have, like I said, those two big buckets. You have the temporary visa classifications and then permanent residence. If you're thinking of permanent residence, that's great. But realistically, it's probably, depending on your country of birth, it's probably going to take at least 3 to 4 years, if not longer. There are exceptions on both ends. It could take much, much longer if you were born in India or China, Mexico. Could take less time than that if you were born elsewhere, and depending on the classification. But it's going to take a while. It's not an immediate thing where you think, oh, I have an employer willing to sponsor me. We're going to go ahead and submit that green card application. This time next year, I'll be in the United States. No, at least not through the green card process.
Yeah, that does take it. I mean, there's just some things that happens behind the scenes that slows it down at USCIS. There's the FBI does a security check or a background check on you. There's all kinds of things that has to happen in terms of due process.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of factors that delay, that increase processing times, for sure.
Just before you continue, could you just explain to us the difference between the EB2 and the EB3 green card categories? I just want to understand how they differ.
Yeah, absolutely. So the EB2, so when we're talking about these preference categories, there are 5 different preference categories within the employment-based realm. And the two that are I would say most commonly used are the EB2 and EB3. So EB2 is for positions in general, for positions that require a master's degree or higher. When I say master's degree, that is defined in the regulations. So a master's degree or equivalent, the equivalent can be a single source bachelor's degree, meaning you just go to one school for 4 years or 5 years, whatever the amount is, you get a bachelor's degree, followed by 5 years of progressive experience. So either one of those, you can fall into the EB2 category. The
Okay.
EB2 classification also includes something called the national interest waiver. You can qualify there if you have an advanced degree or exceptional ability. But basically, just know that the EB2 classification in general is for positions that require a minimum of a master's degree, which includes a bachelor's plus 5. So that's an important thing to think about, is the position has to require that and the person applying has to have that as well. So if you have a master's degree and you're applying to work as a cashier at Target, then it's not going to work, right? Because that position doesn't require a master's degree. So it has to be both. The
Right.
EB3 classification is for positions that require either a bachelor's degree or at least 2 years of experience. And then within EB3, kind of there's another classification for positions that require less than 2 years of experience. And the wait generally for a green card is going to be longer for that preference category.
Okay. Now, just backtrack a little bit onto the NIW. There's so a national interest waiver. That's not. What does that mean in layman's terms? I mean, it sounds like it needs to be in national interest. Dig a little bit there for me. I mean, it's
Yeah,
not like you
absolutely.
have to be a Nobel Prize winner, right?
No, no, you do not have to. It helps. No, you don't have to have a Nobel Prize. So the Nobel Prize, a lot of times people call the EB1A classification the Einstein visa. And even for the EB1A, which is for foreign nationals of extraordinary ability, you do not have to have a Nobel Prize. You do not have to be Einstein or the equivalent. But there are certain regulatory requirements that you have to meet. You have to basically show that you're at the very top of your field. The national interest waiver falls into the EB2 category. What I just talked about, the foreign national of extraordinary ability, falls into EB1. National interest waiver, for both of those, you can self sponsor. That means that you do not have to have an employer to sponsor you for permanent residence within that classification, within the national interest waiver. The national interest waiver, the requirements are a bit more fluid than the regulatory requirements for the EB1A. Basically, you have to show, and I'm paraphrasing here, this is not the word for word requirements, but you have to show that your work is in the national interest of the United States. So that can mean different things, right? What it cannot mean is that you've done a really great job for this project for your particular company, and your company and their clients are using it, because that's not a national impact. You have to show that your work is in the national interest. So we're talking about, I've done national interest cases where, for somebody who's in biomedical research, but also for the economy, their work is, building up the economy, AI, all different. Basically, if you can tie your work to something that is in the national interest of the United States, then you could be eligible for this classification. But that's not enough. You also have to show that you are well positioned to continue your endeavor in the United States. And that's kind of a nebulous concept, but basically you have to show the standard is not as high as the EB1A for a national of extraordinary ability, but you have to show that you've made a significant contribution and that you're established, that you're in a position to be able to continue to do so in the United States. And then finally, also kind of nebulous, you have to show that it is in the interest of the United States for you to get this without having to go through the labor certification process. So in other words, you have to show that your contributions outweigh, or your potential contributions outweigh, the process of the labor certification, whose purpose is to protect US jobs. So there are three major aspects to it. And it sounds, I think a lot of people look at the national interest waiver and think, oh, I could do that. And maybe you can, but not as many people qualify for it, I think, as they think qualify for it. So
Not as
definitely talk to an immigration attorney. I'm not handling those right now, but definitely talk to an immigration attorney. And I can give referrals if anybody's interested.
right, right. Now, you, by the way, if you're listening to us and you would like to know how to get a hold of Emily, we're going to put her details on the screen here, and you'll be able to find it. So, Emily, in terms of just some of the questions that I get, and I think there's still a point five that you need to drive home. Am I right? But before
Yes.
we get there, just some of the things that I get, like I had someone recently ask if you've overstayed um, on a visa, would that be like a real big problem for you? Can you still continue to pursue a green card? What advice would you give someone like that?
I don't know if you noticed, I just took a deep breath because that's such a big question. So it depends. Our favorite lawyer answer, right? It depends. So a couple of things. If you are fortunate enough to be in the situation where you are married to a US citizen and that person is sponsoring you for permanent residence, then it probably does not matter. I'm not saying, oh, everybody go overstay and then marry a US citizen. Not saying that. But we have lots of clients every single month, every week really, who have overstayed for various reasons, are married to a US citizen, it's a true relationship, they're able to get a green card, no issue. So it depends on that situation. There are certain, within the employment based realm, it really does depend. And I know that's the cliche answer, but it really does depend. So, for example, there is a section of the law in terms of the green card process, there's a section of the law called 245K that will forgive a person being out of status, having certain violations for up to 180 days. But if you're in a situation where you think you need to take advantage of that, absolutely consult with an immigration attorney. And it does not have to be me, but consult with somebody who knows what they're doing, please. In addition, we have had this happen before, where a person is out of status and they need to extend their status or change their status. Again, it depends on how long they've been out of status, why they've been out of status. There's a provision in the regulations that allows USCIS to use their discretion to approve an extension or a change of status petition. So I'm talking here about a non-immigrant visa classification, to allow them to extend their status or change status when it's through no fault of their own. There's certain criteria you have to meet. It's called a nunc pro tunc filing. That's Latin for now is then. And we've done that a number of times before. So it's not guaranteed because it's at the discretion of USCIS, but it is possible.
We're now dealing with, I mean, this question was loaded because we're dealing with trying to fix something that seems like it's broken. A lot of that you can really only help with if you are already in the United States. And you make it very difficult for an immigration attorney if you have overstayed before and you are trying to get back into the country, because there's very little that they can do for you, because when you arrive at the border, it's going to be up to that border official to decide whether he or she thinks that you're going to overstay the next time he lets you into the country. So it's I think it's best to, I always say, let's err on the side of doing things right in the first place.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Okay, let's move on to point 5.
Well, that's a great segue again to point number 5, which is that immigration law is complex. US immigration law, especially, it's incredibly complex, and you
Mm.
don't have to do it alone. And in fact, I recommend that you don't do it alone. And by that, I don't mean, I'm not sitting here saying, as an immigration lawyer, I'm not saying you always have to hire an immigration attorney for anything and everything that you do. That may or may not be the best situation for you. It's like a plumber saying, oh, you can't fix that on your own, you have to hire me, right? You may have the skill set to do it, absolutely fine. But know that you are not alone. Know that it is incredibly complex to understand. There are always exceptions to any given rule. There always are nuances. It always depends, seriously, on your specific case. So know that it's complex. It's not just you who can't, who's having a hard time understanding the system, and you don't have to do it alone. There are thousands of qualified immigration attorneys who are compassionate, and we want to help you, and we want to make sure that you're doing things the right way and not creating problems down the road.
Right. Now, if someone wanted to reach out to you, Emily, how would they go about doing that? Is there a
Sure.
specific way? You have like an intake form somewhere?
Yes. So if you go to our website, which is sumnerimmigration.com, so that's my last name, SUM, like Mary and like Nancy ER. We have sumnerimmigration.com. We have a button at the top that says something like schedule an appointment, and that's an intake form that will have a couple of different questions to make sure that we can help you. If it's something that we can't help you with, that page will direct you to some referrals. And then you can schedule an appointment that way. I post frequently on LinkedIn on my personal page. I'm Emily Sumner on LinkedIn. And we have a YouTube channel. On our YouTube channel, Sumner Immigration, we have a series called Sumner School Business Immigration Basics. And we have the foundation of another library called Sumner School Family Immigration Basics. So check out our videos there. And then I go live every Tuesday at noon. And we post there on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube. Yeah.
All right. Good. Well, listen, if you guys listening to Emily and you like what she's saying, and you are thinking about your own immigration and you have some questions, go onto LinkedIn, find her there, and connect with her. find her on YouTube. Listen, tune into those sessions that she has. I remember I tuned into Charles Cook and Greg Siskin for probably about 2 or 3 years before we made the move. And so educate yourself, speak to her, reach out to her. It really is. I mean, you can Google as much as you like. That's why I started my group, is because there's so much stuff, there's so much noise out there that, that you always need someone else to help to confuse you. And that's what happens on Google. It's like waking up in the middle of the night trying to Google a pain that you have in your chest. You're probably going to learn that you're going to die within a couple of minutes. Just go and see a doctor. And that's what Emily does. Is she's an immigration doctor. So go and speak with her. Let's see if we can help you. Emily, it's
Absolutely.
been so much fun to have you on here. I
Thank
really
you.
I
I
enjoy
really enjoyed
speaking with you. I love speaking with you. You've got so much energy, and I really know that you have a heart to help people. And from that perspective, I really can recommend you.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Good. Well, everyone have a good week out there. I'm glad you could tune in for the session. And if you want to be on this podcast, if you're a lawyer, if you are doing anything that's exciting, if you're growing your practice, if you want to know more about what we do, reach out to us. Good. I think it went very well.
I think
We'll
so
cut it
too.